Good afternoon. We are pleased to see the high turnout of our business colleagues who have signed up for this evening's discussion of the upcoming political redistricting, which will once again affect greatly the credibility of our representative democracy. Business people are used to dealing with it and solving problems. We recognize that understanding a problem is the preamble to making progress to resolve it. Our organization, Reform Elections Now, started out as a group of mostly Harvard Business School alumni who were motivated by a 2017 report by business executive Catherine Yale and Harvard professor Michael Porter. They stated that the current politics industry is a classic duopoly with negative impacts affecting not only representative government, but also American business competitiveness. They highlighted the election process impacts as disincenting constructive government action and causing the political polarization and paralysis that has become a major concern for all of us. Our team has evolved into a larger nonpartisan association of business and law school alumni. We've been working to educate ourselves and others as to how to include civic engagement as part of our personal responsibilities. We hope that this afternoon's discussion of gerrymandering will motivate you to be better citizens, taking seriously your role to participate in politics in ways that improve our representative government. The high turnout for last year's election reflects both an interest and a concern for how our government functions, with many questioning the fairness of both the process and its results. We believe that informed citizens and business leaders can influence and improve the process, yielding greater fairness and more responsive government as a positive result. Peter Cyrus is our Reform Elections Now Director of Research. He has proven to be highly insightful during 2020, having anticipated too many of the difficult moments of the 2020 election, including the potential for January 6th violent demonstration. Peter has published international business texts as well as novels dealing particularly with political and business transformation in China. He was also named Harvard Business School's New York Volunteer of the Year in 2019. He is our champion in terms of presentations and debate, and we do want to leave plenty of time for discussion at the end. So we will have a Q&A tab at the bottom, I believe, where you can input questions. And Herb Kaplan from our core team will coordinate the discussion after Peter's exposition on gerrymandering. Peter, if you're ready, I now turn the meeting over to you.
Mike, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen and it's straight. Hopefully everyone else can. If anyone cannot, let us know.
Okay. Thanks for coming today. So today we're going to talk about redistricting and gerrymandering, how politicians choose their voters instead of voters choosing their elected officials. Now, redistricting is the process of drawing new political boundaries every 10 years to comply with changes in the census. It's an essential function of government. Gerrymandering is the process of drawing these boundaries for political gain. Gerrymandering uses redistricting to benefit the party or politicians in control. And when gerrymandering dominates, politicians isolate people by race, create landslide elections, protect incumbents, polarize the population, eliminate moderates, destroy bipartisanship, and invalidate the concept of one person, one vote. Now, this may look like an alphabet, but these are really pictures of real congressional districts drawn by our well-paid and brilliant politicians. These are real districts. This is not something I made up. You can find this on uglyjerry.com. Now, with politicians drawing districts to protect themselves and their parties, landslide elections have become the norm. They doubled between 1992 and 2012. In state legislatures, 61% of all candidates don't face competition from the other party in the final election. And as a result, polarization is increased. Moderates are discouraged from running. Bipartisanship becomes almost non-existent. Since 1951, moderates in Congress have dropped from 61.8% to 2.5%, making them an endangered species. And with politicians drawing their own boundaries, we have a government where Congress has a disapproval rating of over 80%, but 95% of all incumbents running for re-election keep winning. Now, with the completion of the 2020 census, redistricting will begin anew. And Republicans are licking their chops because if they play the game well enough, they should be able to recapture Congress and more state legislatures in 2020. The question is, why do we let politicians draw their own election boundaries? Do we let school children fill in their own report cards? Do we let inmates run the asylum? In John Mecklen's words, redistricting is a matter of screwing the other guy into the ground by the political party that controls the state legislature. If we sleep while politicians are playing gerrymandering games, by the time we realize the fix was in, the election is over and redistricting is come and gone, not to show its greasy, leering face for over a decade. For a decade, not over a decade. Now, politicians have devised wild games for redistricting. These include packing, cracking, kidnapping, hijacking, bespoking, incumbent frenemies, imprisoning, and ending one person, one vote. And these games assure we end up with uncompetitive elections, polarized political parties, and in many cases, the minority party winning the most seats. Now, to win gerrymandering games, politicians ignore the rules they are supposed to follow. In political districting, districts are supposed to be compact, contiguous, preserve counties and political subdivisions and cores of previous districts. Yet when drawing maps, politicians ignore the rules and focus on maximizing their political interests. Instead of looking geometric, these maps look like they were drawn by people who were stoned. In fact, they probably were. Now, as we look at the politicians' artwork, focus on who is helped and hurt by this creativity. Let's start with one of my favorites, the broken wing pterodactyl lying prostrate in Maryland. I mean, this is a work of art.
Here, we've lost you.
Is he frozen? Okay.
Me? You can't hear me?
You're back.
Now we can.
Okay, sorry. I'll get back to presentation. Bear with me.
We left off that with a pterodactyl.
I know where I was. Hold on. Bear with me. Get back to there. Now, this is Goofy kicking Donald Duck in Pennsylvania. It's a
wait minute.
work of art where Goofy's head connects to his body. The district is wide as the parking lot. And trees.
I don't think we see the share.
You don't see it?
No,
No.
Hey, it's good to know, just like in every one of my business meetings, we're having problems with presentations and audio. So that's good.
Share
You
screen,
don't-
Peter.
What do you see on the screen? I'm sorry.
The
Maybe-
gallery view.
The-
Do share
gallery.
screen.
You need to go share screen and get the right screen again.
I had it all up.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Now it's working.
It's
Okay.
working. Okay.
So we need to go back to the pterodactyl.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I apologize. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So here is Goofy kicking Donald Duck in Pennsylvania. Can you see Goofy?
Yep.
Okay, so as I said, where Goofy's head connects to his body. The district is as wide as the parking lot at Creed's Seafood and Steak. And where Goofy's foot connects to Donald Duck's rump, it's as wide as Brandywine Hospital. A work of art. Now, ducks, I love ducks. And I love Jim Jordan, the former chair of the Freedom Caucus. This is a duck in Ohio. Now, some of you may think of Texas as the Longhorn State, but Texans really love dragons. So these are what congressional districts look like in Texas. So to give themselves what they did is, if you look at the 5 on the right, those are all the districts in which the Republicans packed the Democrats. Just beautiful looking dragons facing up and down, especially like number 35. And then just for sport, to give themselves some representation, they created District 2 so that there was a Republican representative around Houston. But it's just, I mean, it's a work of art. Now, you know, one of the good reasons to pack these districts is to create overwhelming majorities of minorities in a small number of districts so that the other party can win more outside districts. So these are 2 in Michigan. And the Democrats won these 2 districts by 378,600 votes in 2020, which enabled the Republicans to pick up other seats with fewer votes. And this is also a work of art. They fit together so perfectly. You have Illinois number 4, which is for Hispanics. It's the earmuff district. And Illinois number 7, which is for Blacks. And it's the dragon eating the kangaroo. And if you look at the earmuff district, at one point, it's less than a block wide. If you look at the dragon eating the kangaroo, they pulled all the Blacks from the South Side in there just to keep them all together and happy. Now, this is another one of my favorites. It's the snake in Louisiana. So what the Republicans did was they looked around and they found some white folks in New Orleans. They moved them to District 1. They found some Black folks in Baton Rouge. They moved them to District 2, and they created this beautiful looking snake. 60% of the people in this district are African Americans, and in all the other Louisiana districts, they're between 14 and 36%. Now, just so you appreciate that snakes are not just in Louisiana, and in Florida, they're not just in the Everglades. District number 5 is a real work of art. It's got a compactness of 3.8%. It's got the lowest compactness of any district in the country. Compare it to District 10 below, which is the red one, which has a compactness of 20.4%. So it's just a beautiful district where they found every minority living anywhere around this area. And the Democrats sued the state of Florida, and the court actually ordered the state to redraw the map. But then the Democratic Congresswoman blasted the judge's ruling as being prejudiced against minorities. Unfortunately for her, the district was, Florida 5 was redistricted. She was indicted on 22 counts and lost in a primary. But the point here is that gerrymandering benefits both the party in control and the member of the other party that holds the gerrymandered seat. Okay, that's packing. Now we got cracking. Now this is real, cracking is really cool, okay? Packing is the art of putting all members of the other party in one district. Cracking is the art of splitting them apart to minimize their representation. So this is Milwaukee. And what the Republicans did was they cracked Milwaukee into 10 suburban, Milwaukee has its own district, but they cracked all the side parts of Milwaukee and put them in 10 suburban districts. And the Republicans won 9 of these 10 districts. And that may be one reason why, even though the Democrats won 18.3% more votes in Wisconsin, the Republicans won 63 assembly seats compared to 36 for the Democrats. Now, this is the Chutzpah Award. This goes to Representative David Lewis of North Carolina. And he explained how Republicans gerrymandered. Mind you, in North Carolina, Republicans and Democrats had about the same number of votes. So he said, quote, "I propose to draw the maps to give a partisan advantage to 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats, because I do not believe it's possible to draw a map with 11 Republicans and 2 Democrats." Now, as it happens, the Republicans won 10, the Democrats won 3, and the pictures below are pictures of the Democratic districts. Now, if you look at the one on the left, Representative Max Blau said, because the district on the left was at times no wider than a highway lane, Representative Max Blau commented, "If you drove down the interstate with both doors open, you'd kill most of the people in the district." So this is how they redistrict. Now, just so you think it's not just other states, remember the rules, okay? Districts are supposed to be contiguous. They're not supposed to cross county lines. I want you to look at these 5 pictures and tell me where the ethnic divisions in New York are. I'm not going to give you the answers, but you can pretty well guess that where Nadler is in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and where Maloney is in Manhattan and Queens, that's where white folks are. And where Velasquez is in Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens, and where AOC is in Queens and the Bronx, there's where Hispanic folks are. And Jeffries, he's got the black folks. So obviously, politicians in New York did not read the rules of how districts are supposed to be created. Okay, so now we've talked about packing and cracking. Let's talk about kidnapping. Kidnapping is where politicians wiggle a few lines to get rid of competitors they don't like. These competitors can be in another party, or they can be in the same party, but threatening to someone in power. Hakeem Jeffries is now the 4th leading Democrat in Congress, but earlier in his career, the power brokers did not like him. In 2000, Jeffries ran against a longtime incumbent for the New York State Assembly. The incumbent won, but Jeffries made a strong showing. The incumbent didn't want to run against him again. So the Democratic leadership obliged him by moving the block on which Jeffries lived to another district. And if you look at the map, there's a picture of where Hakeem's house was, and the district used to include Hakeem's house, but no longer. And Jeffries perfectly summed up this process when he said, quote, "Politics can be pretty rough, but that move was gangsta." Now, just so you think that Hakeem isn't the only guy with gangsta, we have gangsta in the Windy City. Because as I said, politicians will do whatever they can to get rid of competitors who threaten incumbents. In 2000, a young Democratic state senator challenged an incumbent congressman. The state senator, as with Jeffries, did well in the primary. So for the 2002 election, the Democratic leadership decided to carve out the block where he lived and move it to a different congressional district. So I want you to look at the blue pins below. The blue pin on the left is where he was first, and the blue pin on the right is the new district. The state senator was stymied. Sadly, he never had a chance to serve in the House of Representatives. Very tragic. A few years later, the state senator found another job, and in January 2009, he changed jobs again, moving to the East Coast with his wife, Michelle, and his 2 daughters, Sasha and Malia. The fact that Democrats in Chicago would kidnap Barack Obama shows the level of desperation in these political games. Is it worth blocking Obama and Jeffries to protect 2 second-rate incumbents? Now, this is another great one here. Sex with the wrong mistress can get you kidnapped. In New York in 2011, the Democratic Speaker of the New York Assembly, Sheldon Silver, was allegedly having an affair with another member of the Assembly. The Republican Assembly Minority Whip, Dan Burling, was also having an affair with the same woman. When it came time for redistricting, what did Silver do? He shifted Burling's district to include a popular up-and-coming Republican mayor. Burling retired rather than face the primary challenge. And redistricting Burling into retirement was likely beneficial for Silver's sex life. This is very important stuff. Now, Silver had other extramarital affairs with women to whom he channeled government contracts. He was convicted of federal corruption charges and sent to Otisville prison, which probably did not help his sex life. But the political lesson is clear. If you want to keep your job, do not share a mistress with someone who controls redistricting. Now, hijacking. Hijacking is where you take two incumbents from the other party, modify their district, and force them to run against each other. This is called the snake by the lake. And the Republicans created it in Ohio by taking two Democratic districts and creating a district that's 100 miles long and sometimes no more than 1 block wide. And as I say, the biggest risk here is global warming, because if water levels in Lake Erie rise, district could be cut in pieces. They wanted to get rid of Dennis Kucinich, who was a controversial congressman from Cleveland. So what they did was they added more people from Marcy Kaptur's district, Toledo on the left, and Kaptur won and Kucinich retired. Now, there's also hijacking in Illinois. Adam Kinzinger was a freshman congressman. Don Manzullo was a 10-time veteran. The Democrats put the two districts together. Kinzinger had two choices. He could run in the district where he now lived against Jesse Jackson Jr. or challenge Manzullo. He decided not to run against Jackson, who shortly after the election resigned from Congress for wire fraud, mail fraud, mental and physical problems. I don't know why we keep coming up with so many of these people resigning from Congress or getting indicted, but for some reason. Anyway, Kinzinger challenged Manzullo and won. So the Democrats got rid of one Republican congressman. And 8 years later, Kinzinger repaid the favor by becoming the first Republican to support the impeachment of Donald Trump. Now, another key feature of gerrymandering is called bespoke districts. People can buy bespoke suits, and politicians can buy bespoke districts. The process is simple. For bespoke suit, you go to a tailor who takes measurements and custom makes the suit. For a bespoke congressional district, you go to a redistricting tailor who analyzes each candidate and recommends changes in the boundaries so the candidate will have the maximum number of friendly voters. You're Jewish, we'll give you more Jews. You're Hispanic, we'll give you more Hispanics. In California in 2000, Democrats paid Michael Berman, a redistricting consultant and brother of a congressman, $1.3 million, and 30 congresspersons paid him an additional $20,000 each to custom design their districts so all of them would win, which they did. As Representative Loretta Sanchez explained, $20,000 is nothing to keep your seat. If my colleagues are smart, they'll pay, and Michael will draw them the district they can win in. Those who refuse to pay, God help them. Nothing makes a congressperson look better than their own bespoke district. So sometimes in gerrymandering, you have two parties with even control. So what the officials do is they get together and become frenemies. They would rather deal with the devil they know than the devil they don't, so they gerrymander to help each other. Now, imprisoning non-voters. Another good part of the gerrymandering game is using prison inmates. There are 2.3 million inmates in the United States, many from urban areas. Inmates count in the census, but can't vote in the elections except in 2 states. Now, states count the inmates at their prisons instead of at their homes. My favorite, in Anamosa, Iowa, where my brother-in-law's family actually came from, a city council member was elected with 2 votes, his and his wife's, because everyone else in his district was in prison and was not eligible to vote. But the impact of this is that millions of people, 2.3 million inmates, are being transferred from the urban areas where they and their families live to rural areas. Rural areas gain money and voting representation. Urban areas lose. This often shifts the balance of power from one party to another. Okay, so all this, the impact of all of this is to end the whole concept of one person, one vote. Democrats complain that the Senate and the Electoral College are rigged against them. But with gerrymandering, so is the House of Representatives and the state legislature. People forget that in 1996 and 2012, the Democrats won more votes for Congress, but the Republicans won control. In legislative elections in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina in 2018, Democrats won the popular vote, but Republicans won the majority of the seats. Gerrymandering enabled the Republicans to achieve this. Now, let's just look at 2 quick states. In Pennsylvania, Democrats won the popular vote 55 to 44. That's a huge majority. Yet the Republicans won 110 seats compared to 93 for the Democrats. How could that happen? Very simple. In races with no opposition, the Democrats won 56, Republicans won 17. When the winner received 60% or less, Republicans won 46, Democrats won 23. By redistricting Democrats into landslide districts, Republicans maintained control of the legislature. In Wisconsin, same thing. Democrats won a big majority, Republicans won almost 2/3 of the seats. And as soon as they won control, what did? They passed new legislation to purge 230,000 Democrats off the rolls. But look at what happened. In districts with no opposition, the Democrats won 31, the Republicans won 6. In closely contested elections, Republicans won 31, Democrats won 2. And a lot of that comes from this cracking parts of Milwaukee that we talked about earlier. Now, the problems with the census could make things much worse. The census, remember, was conducted during the height of the pandemic. Final results could be delayed. Now, states still have to have the redistricting done by October, but what happens if they don't have a population count? And this is especially important for states that are going to gain or lose, representation. The answer is simple. Politicians will make up the numbers and draw the boundaries however they feel like it. So this time we may have gerrymandering without an underlying population count. Oh yeah, New York City lost 3 million people, too bad. But this kind of thing can happen. So as we said, political redistricting is not only ugly, it's bad for our democracy. It isolates people by race, creates landslide elections, protects incumbents, polarizes our population, eliminates moderate candidates, destroys bipartisanship, and invalidates the concept of one person, one vote. It's got to be fixed now. Look, politicians should not draw their own boundaries. We don't need ducks, snakes, dragons, kangaroos, and earmuffs, pterodactyls for elections. Politicians in North Carolina shouldn't decide how many candidates they want to elect. The politicians in Ohio shouldn't be able to decide which Democrat to eliminate. Having politicians draw election districts threatens our democracy. Now, the Supreme Court says they're not going to touch this. They've said this is a state's issue. And in fact, state courts in Pennsylvania and North Carolina have already ruled against redistricting. And the state courts will help. The question is it too late to matter during this term? Now, let's just take a second and look at how states do it. In many states, the legislature makes all the decisions about redistricting. That's how you get all these strange shapes. The worst situation is a state controlled by one party, because when a state is controlled by one party, that party will do anything it can get away with. States with a divided government at least have a check and balance. The second system is advisory commissions. Advisory commissions make recommendations, but legislatures generally have veto power. This is an improvement, but not really there. The best system is independent commissions, which operate without control or influence by legislatures. These can help avoid partisan conflicts of interest, favoritism, and according to the Scholar Strategy Network, they're much more able to produce fairer and more competitive elections. Now, this is what the world looks like today. The pictures in red, they're doing it pretty well. They've got independent commissions of one sort or another. And well, there's a green. Green was the state demographer, but Missouri just voted him out. States like to hang on to power. The most worrisome are all the ones in gray, but the ones in blue and light blue are certainly not perfect right now. These are the states that do it right in one way or another. Arizona, California, Idaho, Colorado, Michigan, Montana, Washington, and Iowa have pretty fair systems. These are the states that have independent commissions with some form of legislative approval: Virginia, Hawaii, New Jersey, Utah, New York, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Ohio, Minnesota. Now, before those of you in New York start congratulating yourselves, just hang on 1 or 2 more slides. According to the Brennan Center, single party, as I said before, single party control is the worst. It creates an almost irresistible temptation for the party in charge to make decisions behind closed doors with partisan objectives driving the outcome. And now with better data and map drawing technology, the danger has only increased. The Brennan Center found that in 2016, gerrymandering in just 3 states, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, gave Republicans 16 to 17 more seats in the US House of Representatives than would have been expected with unbiased maps. And the problem is that Democrats, this is not to say Republicans are bad and Democrats are good. Democrats, for various reasons, having to do with both geography and with minority voters who live in concentrated areas, are much less aggressive in gerrymandering because of internal politics. It's not that they're better, it's just they're chicken to do anything. Now, here's the way we sit today. 9 states are under Democratic control. 23 states are under Republican control. And if we look at the states, the Republicans control 174 seats, Democrats control 55 seats. If we add the states with political commissions and look at the Republican control there, we have Republicans controlling 212 seats and Democrats controlling 55 seats. Even giving Michigan the benefit of the doubt, it's 198 seats to 55 seats. So from this number, if Republicans control 212 seats, it's not going to be very hard for them to end up with a majority in the House of Representatives. Now, as I said, both parties like to gerrymander. Democrats were more than happy to gerrymander Obama, Jeffries, Kinzinger, Sheldon Silver's rival, and others. And just to show you, in Virginia, Democrats introduced a constitutional amendment for an independent commission. Of course, when they gained power, the party changed its position and opposed the amendment, which passed anyway. And in New York, just 2 months ago, the Democrats passed a ballot measure that, if passed by voters in the next election, would give them complete control over the redistricting cycle. In other words, the Democrats in the in the state house and the state senate passed a resolution getting rid of the independent commission that voters had approved 2 elections ago. So when they have a chance to gerrymander, Democrats are more than happy to do so. It's just that the Republicans are better. Republicans control all branches of governments in 24 states versus 13 for the Democrats. Democrats are packed in urban areas and don't have the flexibility of the Republicans. You can't gerrymander New York City with Elmira. And the Democrats want to ensure that their minority supporters have representation, so they tend to be less aggressive in cracking and packing. We at Reform Elections Now believe election districts should be drawn by independent commissions, not by politicians. We support ending gerrymandering, not because it benefits Republicans or Democrats, but because it isolates people by race, creates landslide elections, protects incumbents, polarizes our population, eliminates moderates, destroys bipartisanship, and invalidates the concept of one person, one vote. We have to act now before redistricting from the 2020 census leaves us worse off for another decade. Politicians should not be able to draw their own districts. Nonpartisan commissions without legislative veto are the most effective solution. We should work to influence voters to enact amendments for nonpartisan commissions. But for the current census, political activism in states with one-party rule will be essential. This is especially critical in states like Florida, Texas, and North Carolina that will be adding seats. While politicians will try to get away with whatever they can, they are public servants who can be embarrassed into doing the right things if citizens are sufficiently vocal. We cannot wait until redistricting is come and gone, not to show its greasy, leering face for a decade. So thank you very much. Now I'll turn it back to the Herb.
Peter, thank you. It's Herb Kaplan. Thank you for that insightful presentation. We want to open it up to questions and comments from our group of 50 plus people who are on the call. There was one comment, and the way to do that is that you can either ask the question in the chat box or comment, or you can go to the participants panel and hit the raise your hand icon, and then I'll call on you in the order in which your hands are raised. Or if it doesn't get out of control, we can just make comments sort of from the floor. I want to start, Peter, by saying that I read one comment earlier that said that the presentation seemed to be partisan. And I did not hear a partisan presentation. I thought I heard a factual presentation, but can you respond to the comment that appeared to be a partisan presentation, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like saying that Michael Jordan is a better basketball player than I am, which he is. Gerrymandering is very tricky for Democrats. It's tricky for a couple of reasons. First of all, when they're packed into cities, it's difficult, as I said, to gerrymander New York City with Elmira. Secondly, if you go back and look at the pictures I showed you from the New York City, there are interest groups, and the Democrats, rather than the Democrats could have gerrymandered around New York City so that there wasn't one Republican district in it, which there is, after Max Rose lost the Staten Island, Brooklyn district. But they wanted to keep each of the minority groups and each of the other non-minority groups happy. There were interests that they wanted to keep happy and incumbents they wanted to protect. And, the Republicans this isn't partisan. The Republicans just have a better ground game. They're better at it. And the Democrats would do, if you look at Virginia or Maryland with the pterodactyl, I mean, Democrats will do the same thing the Republicans will do. It's just the Republicans have figured out how to do it better.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Ron Randall. Has his hand up.
Unmute, Ron.
Unmute yourself, Ron. Ron, you're muted. You're still muted, Ron. I tell you what, let me call on,
Peter, I got it here.
okay.
What does the federal HR 1 bill do about gerrymandering? And is the most effective way for us to get rid of it to support that bill?
Ask me that question a month from now, but I will say that while the Republicans are focused state by state on drawing districts, which will give them control of the House and has given them control of all these state legislatures, the Democrats have this HR 1 bill, which I would equate to a Hail Mary pass, which unfortunately they don't have either Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes playing quarterback. So that is exactly the kind of attitude that has led to the situation where the Republicans have won this game and the Democrats have lost.
Just to pick up on the point that Ron, or the question that Ron raised, I printed out a document from the Brennan Center, and it said in HR 1, if it were passed, all states would be required to use independent commissions. And now, Peter, are you saying that there's no chance that it's going to pass in the Senate? So no matter what HR 1 says, it doesn't matter? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I'm saying tune in next month, and because next month's presentation is on voting rights. But HR 1 does say that that everybody has to have an independent commission. Unfortunately, HR 1 also says that with regard to districting, nothing will take effect until the 2030 census. So if you want to sit around for 10 years, that's okay.
I didn't read it that way. Are you sure about that?
Yes.
It said that this change would be implemented in 2021, even if implementation of some parts might have to wait. So
Yeah,
I took that to mean
no.
that. Okay, let me ask Richard Kane to ask his question, make his comment.
Peter, thanks very much for the research you did on this. You say at the end, we must act now. I didn't hear a suggestion of whether Reform Elections Now has a position on what we should do. What should I do to create the kind of change?
Well, I mean, you know, that's really the great question.
Yeah, but is there a great answer?
No, there's not a great answer, and that's the problem. But the great answer is basically for people to start to yell and scream about what's going on. I mean, look, interestingly, as I said before, in 2018 in Missouri, they passed a really good bill creating a state demographer. In 2020, they passed a bill revoking the state demographer. In New York, in 2018, we passed a bill creating an independent commission. Now in 2021, we're going to have a chance to revoke the independent commission. If politicians will get away with what they can, and being vocal about it seems to be the only thing that people will respond to.
Peter, there. I see another hand raised by Susie Moto. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I've been doing presentations here in Texas around the Houston area. speaking about redistricting and gerrymandering. And I wanted to clarify one point on HR1, which is that it only sets up the Independent Redistricting Commission for congressional districts.
Yes.
State and House seats will can still be managed by the state. I also wanted to give you some bad news that Texas, there won't be any change in Texas. And in fact, the former former chair of the redistricting committee in the House said that there will be no, we have a few bills for IR calling for commissions, but they're going to die in committee, every single one of them. They will not be considered. And the maps will be partisan, and I am quoting because the Supreme Court says it's okay. And that's exactly what he said. And worse, beyond that, there was a bill, Texas Senate Bill 11, that there was a hearing on last week where they are going to be gerrymandering the courts next, the Court of Appeals. So we have nothing. We're stuck for the next 10 years, unless HR1 passes. Then we can maybe get some help.
But I mean, Susan, what's really interesting is if you take an area like, whether it's Dallas, Fort Worth, the San Antonio area, and you look at how, if you go back to the map that I showed of the brilliant artists in Texas and how they create these districts, I mean, they are literally going and saying, well, like, let's see, we'll cram all the Democrats into this district. And one of the things that happens in Texas, as in many of these other states, is that the Republicans win more of the seats than they're entitled to. And that's not a partisan comment. That's just facts. That's just numbers.
And it's reverse in states like Massachusetts or New York, where there's a disproportionate number of legislators for the Democratic Party. And there are many people on this call who are both New Yorkers and Massachusetts residents and citizens. And we can talk to our representatives. State representatives are much more reachable and approachable than the national congressional representatives. And it is the state legislatures that make the election laws. And that is a constitutional provision. And that's why the Supreme Court has not been willing to challenge it.
Precisely. But I would say Texas is a primarily Republican state, which is not a problem. What I just like to see is a little bit more competition. And for example, Austin, they have 6 representatives, and they're basically cut up in such a way that they only have 1 Democratic representative. It's pretty bad in Texas.
Are you talking?
And by the way, I'm in congressional district number 2.
Oh, okay,
That
you're
lovely horseshoe-shaped thing.
Yeah. Well, no. What's interesting is, as I say, if you push the numbers and you look at all the districts, what comes out time and time again is the Democrats winning districts with 80% of the vote and the Republicans winning districts with 60% of the vote. And one of the reasons is that the Republicans are just better at the ground game because they've been focused on it.
I'm looking for other questions, and I'm looking at the participant screen and looking for hands raised. And John Coburn, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted us to think about this beyond. This is the second presentation of what's very interesting of essentially the same thing, and it's very powerful. And the way you put it up, I think it's very credible. Is there any way you can take this to another level where we can get, Fareed Zakaria, we can get Rachel Maddow, we can get John Meacham, and we can get somebody or New York Times, or can we get this presentation before the American public in some way that would be credible?
No, it's a good point. We're trying. I will tell you, it's funny when we did the presentation on in September that talked about the riots and the deaths after the election. I was interviewed on one of those TV stations, and then after January 6th, they called me back to interview me again, and their question was, I predicted that the riots and the deaths were going to be January 11th and January 12th, not January 6th. What did I get wrong?
And you made those predictions in September, right?
Yeah, but I apologize for being 6 days off. But what we're trying to do, Jeff, is raise awareness and hope that we're working hard to communicate with whatever media we can, because we think these are issues that have to be understood. I just want to make a comment that I see Rebecca Theobald said independent commissions are not a panacea. We're not suggesting they are a panacea. We're just suggesting that they're better than letting the politicians do all of the redistricting.
Can I ask why she said the comment was made that independent commissions are not a panacea? What is the downside of that, of an independent commission having 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents? What's the downside of that?
I think compared to what we have, there's very little downside. I mean, look, it's not. This is, to me, and I think Richard Kane really, raised the right question. This is very sad to me because there's no easy solution, and because it's a real big problem, the kind of thing that Susan's talking about in Texas. When you look at states where one party wins, I mean, democracy is supposed to be, you have one party wins 55% of the vote, the other party wins 44% of the vote, and the party with 44% ends up in control because of these games.
Can I suggest, though, that there are things we can and should do in our home territory? I think, for example, in New York, where there is supposed to be an independent redistricting commission, if the legislature tries to overrule it, which they have the right to do under the current provisions, I think we as citizens ought to object, whether we're Democrats or Republicans. I think there is a common ground for Americans to believe in fairness, and we can do something to put our own house in order rather than just criticize the other party because there are more of them doing it better than we are. We being, in this case, New Yorkers.
You're absolutely right, Mike. And frankly, in New York, you're going to have a chance to vote, because the only way to overturn the commission that they put in effect in New York is for the voters to overturn it. And so in the next election, you're going to have a chance. Everybody who's on this call who lives in New York is going to have a chance to vote on that.
Vote on what exactly? On what the legislature proposes?
On rescinding the
districting.
independent commission. We passed an independent commission for New York. Now the politicians want to make it disappear. Just like in Missouri, they passed the state demographer. And then the party in control in that state said, well, we don't want to do this fair. So let's rescind it. They did rescind it.
How is it going to appear on a ballot, Peter?
It will appear on a ballot in the next election.
What will be the nature of the proposition? That we accept the redistricting from the independent
Resolve that we
commission?
get rid of the independent commission.
I thought that the option was for the legislature to review and change the rules, to change the boundaries.
There is, but what the legislature voted on was not to have a bunch of people overlooking them and making comments.
Mary Flannery.
Yeah, so with something like that, Peter, do you think it would be possible in future presentations to let us know that things like that are coming up? And, sort of the recommendation is to, let's say, vote no,
Yeah.
and that we should make sure that we share that with as many people as possible. I also think in general, every time I listen to you, I get so upset because so many of these things just make no sense. But it would be really helpful to know what is already happening, through this group, and what you recommend that we do, and or what you've achieved, like the idea of we're trying to share this with the media. It's like if you have had success or you are trying to do something specific, I think that would be really beneficial.
I would say the problem with this particular presentation is that of all the things we've discussed, and I think I could point to a lot of real successes, gerrymandering, it seems to me, is the most intractable and the hardest to solve. And I go back to what Susan was talking about in Texas. I mean, it is people, this is the lifeblood for people. People are entrenched around it. And, as I quoted from, it's something that people look at once every 10 years. And then by the time they get, focused on it, they're stuck with it for the next decade. This is really a time for people to take a hard look and to let your politicians know that this is not something you'll stand for.
John Fixtall. Unmute yourself, John.
Greetings, everyone, from South Dakota, where a party with 45% of the registered voters hold over 90% of the seats in the legislature. We've tried previously to pass redistricting, and I have to tell you that the primary argument against it is going to be, but this is just Democrats trying to gain more seats. That's what the arguments will be. And we found those to be 30 to 40% compelling in the testing going into a 2016 campaign, which we lost. We're taking another shot at it here in 2022. That's merely a comment, but for thought and for response, Peter, I've sat through and I've given many presentations on gerrymandering. That was the best. And far and away the greatest injection of humor. I really enjoyed that. Here's what's worth a comment. There is a tension between the noble sentiment of wanting to make things more fair and the simple fact that this is about giving Democrats a ghost chance in hell. And that will have to be dealt with somewhere. And I invite your comments regarding that.
Well, I mean, first of all, as far as humor is concerned, I don't think for people like Sheldon Silver, this was humorous. I mean, it was about his sex life. And I think that's what's most important about gerrymandering, is to make sure that, our politicians have a good sex life and get rid of their competition. But, there's one sort of third rail of American politics that I've stayed away from, but I do want to mention, which is they passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the Voting Rights Act basically said that minorities were being discriminated against and there should be majority minority districts. Probably not that many in South Dakota, but and one of the things that happened as they've implemented the Voting Rights Act is that you have these massive minority districts that are 90%. I mean, almost all the Congress people that run without opposition are from minority districts. And that has created a situation where it puts that's what puts the Democrats at a disadvantage. I'm not suggesting that the Democrats changed their position on this, but I'm merely observing that in state after state, there is an imbalance. And I don't have any, what was your last word? What did you say about ghost?
Well, now in South Dakota, we really can't even get Democratic candidates to run. They simply won't win. They don't win.
Yeah.
So that's the way it is. And the main reason, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because they don't believe they can win. And the voting public does not believe that they can win. And therefore, they don't want to discard a vote. So they vote for purportedly the candidate. I'd like to think that a lot of Democrats are hopefully voting for the more moderate candidate. But without RCV or approval voting.
Well, that's what happened. And I mean, it's not just Democrats. You find this, Democrats in South Dakota or Republicans in New York City. I mean, as I say, over 60% of legislators in the United States ran without second party opposition. So what kind of a democracy do you have when you don't even have real elections?
Peter, can you perhaps comment on how proportional representation is an oblique way perhaps to, I wouldn't say solve the problem, but at least to moderate it if we can get back to it, as we seem to have moved away from it over the years?
I could, but I'm going to save it. And the reason I'm going to save it is that, I mean, states, there's still one or two states that have multi-member districts. I think there are 4 or 5 states actually that have multi-member districts, like South Dakota. Is that why you're raising your hand? Arizona, a few others.
What we have is senatorial districts, and there are 2 representatives for each senatorial district, which makes RCV pretty tough.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting idea, and it's an idea as I say that right now. I've used this analogy before. I got a better chance of playing in the NBA next year than states do of increasing proportional representation. I think it's a very good system. But as long as the politicians have a good deal right now. They get reelected, they keep away the people they don't like, and the voters be damned. So I don't think right now I'd rather see RCV than I like proportional representation. I think you get a better shot at RCV than you do proportional representation right now.
Thank you. Thomas Claflin, you had your hand up before. Do you still want to make a comment or ask a question? And if you do, unmute yourself. Okay. Does anybody else have a comment or question. It's 6:40. We've had a brisk conversation. Maybe we're reaching the point where we should wind it up. Mike, do you want to take over?
Well, I would like to say that regardless of what state you're in, you should be looking at what the dynamics are in your state. And I do believe we can make a difference in terms of influencing local legislators. And that's something that we should take as part of our responsibility, not just to vote in elections, but to let our representatives know when they're not representing fairness and democracy in ways that we feel are good examples for our children and our grandchildren. And I do think that's something that we can all make steps in the right direction for, and not have to wait for 2030 to see improvements.
Mike, I just want to say, I've been trying to answer these questions, so I haven't been looking at all the questions, but they're just two questions two things that I think are interesting. Eleanor Latimer pointed out that the district line goes between her husband's and her pillows. But, there's an interesting, Joan Schwartz was talking about Wisconsin, which I think is very interesting because it's one of those divided states. And the governor has created a People's Map Commission. And the assembly leader has said, well, it's not legislatively mandated. You have a couple of states like Wisconsin, a few others, where you have the one party in control of the redistricting because they control the state legislature, but you have a governor from another party. And I think it's very important in those kind of states for people to be active. I also think that in the where people should be diligent is in the states that, as I said before, are going to gain or lose congressional representation. I mean, New York is going to lose congressional representation, and I guarantee you that maybe 2 seats, and whatever 2 seats they lose are going to come out of the height of the Republicans. And you can bet that Texas is adding 3 seats, and you can bet that all those 3 seats are coming to the benefit of the Republicans. And it's when those kind of maps start getting drawn that people really have to start speaking up and say, this isn't fair, or this is fair.
There was a hand raised by Beth Horowitz. Do you still want to ask a question, Beth? If you do, unmute yourself. Okay, Mike.
Peter. Peter, I don't know how to raise my hand here.
That's surprising.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, MIT graduates, I guess, don't know how to raise hands, but.
Right. The thing that I'm really surprised at is that the Democratic Party, with all the funding that they've gotten, isn't following essentially what you're talking about right now, which is essentially planning for not only the next election, but the election after the next election. And they have the money to do that. They have the money to plan. Why aren't they doing it? Why are you the one to essentially be presenting these issues as being so important? Where is the leadership of the Democratic Party and the moderate Republicans sitting down and planning these things? Are you just the voice in the wilderness here?
Well, I'm not here to speak for the Democrats or the moderate Republicans, but I think, going back to Ron Randall's question before about HR 1, I mean, I think the Democrats are focusing on the big picture, HR 1, a big national program. Meanwhile, and this is exactly what you're seeing in the voting rights issues as well. And the Republicans are focused on really nuts and bolts things like, the equivalent in gerrymandering of you can't drink water or eat a candy bar while you're in line. And the reality is that the on the ground game works better than the big picture.
Absolutely. And yet they seem to be following a failing proposition here. You recognize it. I can't believe that this isn't recognized by many of the other leadership in the parties. They're even looking at how successful the Republicans have been doesn't seem to move them off their failing ground game.
As I said, we're nonpartisan here. I'm not trying to.
I understand that, but
that's their problem.
Right. I understand.
Mike, I wonder if we should be wrapping this up. It's 6:45 now. Mason, Mike, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I do want to thank everyone for attending. I think it's been certainly, as always, an insightful presentation, but a particularly good discussion and frustration that's inevitable with what we're dealing with for a long time. And I do hope that one of the messages, though, is that we can make a difference. We can influence our state legislators, that this is where the rubber meets the road in many of these issues, and we need to engage more often. I found it quite astonishing, but when I try to reach my state legislators, I find that they answer that it doesn't matter what organization I'm with, they just don't get enough feedback other than large petitions and things that come from social media. So please get engaged, get involved. And if you wanted to do more with us on some of the subjects in the future or the past, please do get in touch with us. Thanks for attending tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Ken.